A ruthless millionaire hears desperate cries outside his mansion. Two freezing little girls beg to be let in. "Please, we're cold." He refuses. Then, one collapses in the snow. He lets them in. But when one weakly whispers a single name, Bella, his entire world shatters. Who sent these girls to his doorstep? And what dark truth are they hiding? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The wind howled through the empty halls of Nicholas Calloway's mansion, making the vast space feel even more hollow than usual. He sat in his study, surrounded by expensive furniture and priceless artwork, but none of it brought warmth to the cold December night. The sudden beeping of the security alarm jolted him from his paperwork. Nicholas frowned, his steel gray eyes narrowing as he clicked through the security camera feeds on his desktop monitor. The sight that greeted him made his jaw clench. Two tiny figures huddled by his front gate, their small bodies shaking in the falling snow. "Mr. Calloway," Ms. Wilkins's worried voice came through the intercom. "There are two little girls at the gate." "I can see that," he replied curtly, watching as the children pressed closer to the intercom button. Their matching pink coats were dusted with snow, their dark hair whipping in the bitter wind. A small voice crackled through the system. "Please, we're cold. Can we come in?" Nicholas's fingers drummed against his mahogany desk. He'd seen this before, criminals using children as bait, counting on people's sympathy to lower their guard. He'd built his empire by never letting emotion cloud his judgment. "Mr. Calloway," Ms. Wilkins appeared in his doorway, her kind face etched with concern. She'd been his housekeeper for 20 years, the only person he somewhat trusted. "They can't be more than 5 years old. We can't leave them out there in this weather." "We can and we will," Nicholas stated firmly. "Call the police if you must, but that gate stays closed." The intercom crackled again. "Please." This time it was a different voice, slightly softer than the first. "We don't have anywhere else to go." Ms. Wilkins wrung her hands. "Sir, look at them. They're just babies." Nicholas stood and walked to the window, watching the security feed more closely. The twins, they had to be twins, were holding hands tightly, their little faces red from the cold. One of them, the one in the slightly more worn coat, kept trying to shield her sister from the wind. "It's a setup," he said, more to convince himself than Ms. Wilkins. "Nobody leaves children out in weather like this unless they're trying to play on someone's sympathies. Or unless they're truly desperate," Ms. Wilkins countered softly. The first little girl's voice came through again, stronger this time. "We promise we'll be good. We won't make any noise or mess." Her words were followed by a violent shiver that Nicholas could see on the camera. "Sir." Ms. Wilkins stepped closer, her voice taking on an edge he'd never heard before. "If you leave them out there, I'm not sure I can continue working for you." Nicholas turned to her, surprised by her ultimatum, but before he could respond, a movement on the security feed caught his eye. The quieter twin suddenly swayed on her feet, her small hand slipping from her sister's grasp. In slow motion, he watched as she crumpled into the snow, her pink coat a stark contrast against the white ground. "Lainey!" The other twin's scream pierced through the intercom, filled with such raw terror that it cut straight through Nicholas's carefully constructed walls. "Please help, my sister, please." Ms. Wilkins was already running toward the front door, but Nicholas's voice stopped her. "Wait!" His eyes remained fixed on the screen, where the conscious twin was now trying desperately to lift her sister from the snow, her own small body shaking with cold and fear. "I'll go." For the first time in years, Nicholas Calloway moved without calculating the risks. He grabbed his coat and rushed toward the front door, his heart pounding with an emotion he couldn't quite name, or perhaps didn't want to acknowledge. Despite Nicholas's command to wait, Ms. Wilkins burst through the front door and rushed down the snow-covered driveway. Her sensible shoes crunched in the fresh snow as she reached the fallen child. Nicholas followed close behind, his long strides eating up the distance, his face tight with barely contained frustration. "Oh, you poor dears," Ms. Wilkins murmured, gathering the unconscious little girl into her arms. The child was light, too light, and her skin felt like ice. The other twin wouldn't let go of her sister's hand, her small fingers white-knuckled with desperation. "Please help her," the conscious twin begged, her voice breaking. Tears froze on her cheeks as she looked up at Nicholas. "Please, sir. Lonnie's all I have." Nicholas stood rigid in the falling snow, his expensive wool coat collecting white flakes. His eyes darted around the perimeter of his property, searching the shadows for any sign of movement or threat. The security lights cast harsh shadows across his face as he finally spoke. "Ms. Wilkins, take them inside, but first..." He pulled out his phone and snapped several photos of the area. "Lock up my office and the East Wing. Anything valuable needs to be secured." Ms. Wilkins clutched Laney closer to her chest, her expression a mixture of relief and disappointment at his continued suspicion. "They're children, Mr. Calloway. Babies who need our help." "They're strangers," he corrected sharply, but held the door open as Ms. Wilkins carried Laney inside. The conscious twin, Leah, he'd heard her sister call her, followed close behind, her small boots leaving wet prints on his marble floor. In the warm light of the grand foyer, Nicholas could see just how bedraggled the children were. Their pink coats were worn thin at the elbows, and their boots had holes patched with duct tape. Ms. Wilkins settled Laney on the plush sofa in the living room, while Leah hovered nearby, refusing to let go of her sister's hand. "I'll get blankets," Ms. Wilkins announced, hurrying toward the linen closet, "and some hot chocolate. These children are frozen through." Nicholas remained by the doorway, watching as Ms. Wilkins returned with an armful of thick blankets. She wrapped both girls carefully, tucking the edges around them with practiced movements that spoke of years of maternal instinct. Leah's eyes never left her sister's face, even as Ms. Wilkins tried to coax her to drink some water. Lonnie stirred slightly under the blankets, her eyelids fluttering. Ms. Wilkins leaned closer, pushing dark hair away from the child's forehead. "There now, sweetheart. You're safe and warm." The little girl's lips moved, forming words so soft they were barely audible. Nicholas found himself stepping closer, drawn by some inexplicable force. And then he heard it. A single word that made his blood run cold. "Bella." Nicholas's face darkened instantly, his features hardening into a mask of stone. Ms. Wilkins glanced up at him, startled by the sudden change in his demeanor. She'd worked for him long enough to recognize when something significant had rattled her employer's carefully maintained composure. "Mr. Calloway?" she questioned softly. But Nicholas wasn't listening. His mind was racing, connecting dots he didn't want to acknowledge. That name, Bella, it couldn't be coincidence. Not after all these years. Not after everything that had happened. Leah looked up at him, her young face showing confusion at his reaction. She pulled her sister's blanket higher, as if trying to protect her from Nicholas's intense stare. Ms. Wilkins continued her ministrations, but kept glancing between Nicholas and the girls, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Nicholas's hands clenched at his sides as he stared at the twins, seeing them in a new light. These weren't just lost children anymore. They were a connection to a past he'd tried desperately to forget, to a name that still had the power to shake his carefully constructed world. Nicholas took a deep breath, steadying himself. When he spoke again, his voice was cold and controlled, betraying none of the turmoil churning inside him. "Where is Bella?" The twins exchanged quick glances but remained silent. Lonnie pulled the blanket tighter around herself while Leah's small chin jutted out defiantly. Their silence spoke volumes. Ms. Wilkins looked up from where she was arranging another blanket, her weathered face creasing with curiosity. In her 15 years of service, she had never heard Nicholas mention anyone named Bella, yet the way his jaw clenched at the name told her this wasn't just any acquaintance. Nicholas turned away from the girls, walking to the tall windows that lined his living room. The snow continued to fall outside, but he wasn't seeing it. Instead, his mind drifted back to another snowy night years ago. She had been different then, younger, with warm brown eyes that crinkled when she laughed. Bella Thompson. The name still tasted bitter in his mouth. He remembered how she would curl up in this very room, reading books by the fireplace. How she had promised to always be honest with him. How she had looked him in the eye and lied, again and again. The betrayal still burned fresh in his memory. The evidence had been irrefutable: bank statements, secret meetings, whispered phone calls. She had been working with his competitors, feeding them information about his company's vulnerabilities. Or so he had believed. He had confronted her in this very room, his anger cold and precise. She had denied everything, tears streaming down her face. But he hadn't listened. Couldn't listen. Trust, once broken, was impossible to repair. "Mr. Calloway?" Ms. Wilkins's voice pulled him back to the present. "The girls should rest now. I've made up the guest room." Nicholas nodded curtly, his reflection grim in the window glass. "Double-check all the security systems before you retire, Ms. Wilkins, and lock up my office." Later that night, Nicholas paced in his bedroom, unable to sleep. The heavy oak door was locked, something he hadn't done in years. The security system's soft beeping usually brought him comfort, but tonight it felt insufficient. These children, were they truly just orphans seeking shelter? Or were they pawns in some larger game? He paused by his door, hearing soft whispers from the hallway. Despite his better judgment, he pressed his ear against the wood. "Do you think he knows?" Leah's voice was barely audible. Lonnie's response was too quiet to make out, but their secretive tone set Nicholas's nerves on edge. What game was Bella playing? And why now, after all these years? Outside the mansion, hidden in the shadows of the snow-laden trees, a figure stood watching. The security lights cast long shadows across the pristine snow, but never quite reached the spot where the observer stood. For long minutes the figure remained motionless, studying the warm lights of the mansion's windows. Then, as silently as a shadow itself, the figure melted away into the darkness of the winter night. Inside his locked room, Nicholas moved to the window, drawing back the heavy curtain. For a moment he thought he saw movement among the trees, but when he looked again, there was nothing there but swaying branches and falling snow. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted tonight, that by opening his door to these children, he had set something in motion that he couldn't control. He let the curtain fall back into place and turned to face his empty room. The mansion's silence felt heavier than usual, weighted with secrets and unspoken questions. Somewhere down the hall, two little girls who knew far too much about his past were whispering in the dark. The morning sun cast long shadows across the mansion's polished floors as Nicholas strode purposefully into the kitchen. Ms. Wilkins was already there, preparing breakfast, while the twins sat quietly at the counter, their small legs dangling from the high stools. "I've made some calls," Nicholas announced, his voice firm and businesslike. "There's a children's shelter in town that can take them today." Ms. Wilkins paused in her cooking, a concerned frown crossing her face. "Mr. Calloway, perhaps we should—" "No." He cut her off sharply. "They can't stay here. This isn't an orphanage." "We're not going." Leah's voice was small but determined. She slid off her stool and stood straight, her chin lifted in defiance. "We need to find our mom." Nicholas felt his jaw tighten. "Your mother?" "Bella," Lonnie whispered, speaking for the first time that morning. "She's been missing for 2 days now." The name hit Nicholas like a physical blow. He gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles turning white. "Bella is your mother?" Leah nodded, reaching into her pocket. "She told us to find help if anything happened to her. She gave us this." She held up a silver pendant, its surface catching the morning light. Nicholas felt the blood drain from his face. The pendant swung gently from Leah's small hand, a delicate silver heart with a distinctive pattern of swirling lines etched into its surface. He knew that pendant. He knew every curve and line of it. His mind catapulted back to another morning years ago. Bella had been sitting across from him at this very counter, her eyes bright with excitement as she presented him with a small velvet box. "It's a set," she had explained, showing him 2 identical pendants. "One for each of us. The patterns are unique. They were custom-made." He remembered how she had laughed when he called it sentimental, how she had insisted on fastening hers around her neck right there. "Now we'll always have a piece of each other," she had said. That pendant had been in his safe for years now, tucked away with other painful memories of their time together. He hadn't been able to throw it away, even after everything that happened, even after he had confronted her with what he thought was evidence of her betrayal, after he had refused to listen to her tearful denials, after he had ordered her out of his life. "Mr. Calloway?" Ms. Wilkins's voice pulled him back to the present. She was watching him with concern, spatula frozen midair. Nicholas straightened, trying to compose himself. "Where did you last see your mother?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. "At our hiding place," Lonnie said softly. "She went out for supplies 2 nights ago. She said she'd be back in an hour, but..." Her voice cracked, and Leah quickly wrapped an arm around her sister. "She always comes back," Leah added, her eyes filling with tears. "Always. But this time she didn't." Nicholas found himself walking to his study, his feet moving of their own accord. His hands shook slightly as he input the combination to his safe. There, in the back corner, lay a small velvet box he hadn't opened in years. The pendant inside was identical to the one Leah held, the same silver heart, the same intricate pattern. He picked it up, feeling its familiar weight in his palm. All this time, he had believed he knew the truth about Bella. He had been so certain of her betrayal. But now, he looked back toward the kitchen where 2 little girls sat waiting, Bella's daughters. Their existence raised countless questions, each more unsettling than the last. What had really happened all those years ago? Why was Bella in hiding, and most importantly, where was she now? Nicholas held both pendants in his palm, their identical patterns catching the morning light. With trembling fingers, he reached for his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Jack, it's Nicholas Calloway. I need information on someone." He kept his voice casual, controlled. "Bella Thompson, just curious about what she's been up to." After hanging up, Nicholas stood at his study window watching the twins playing in the garden under Ms. Wilkins's watchful eye. Their laughter floated up to him, so innocent and pure it made his chest ache. "They're sweet girls," Ms. Wilkins said from the doorway, making him start. She had always moved like a ghost through the mansion. "They can't stay," Nicholas said automatically, but his voice lacked conviction. Ms. Wilkins stepped into the room, her wise eyes studying him. "Mr. Calloway, I've worked for you for 15 years. I've watched you build walls around yourself, shut everyone out." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "If you let these girls in, you'll have to let your past in too. Are you ready for that?" Nicholas didn't answer. He couldn't. That night, as Nicholas worked late in his study, a sharp beeping cut through the silence. He glanced at his security monitor. The system was detecting interference. Someone was trying to disable it. Heart-pounding, Nicholas pulled up the security footage from the previous night. He rewound through hours of darkness until something caught his eye. There, a dark sedan parked across the street, almost hidden by trees. Someone had been watching his house. "Mr. Calloway?" A small voice made him jump. Leah stood in the doorway, Lonnie half hidden behind her. Both girls were in borrowed pajamas that were far too big for them. "You should be in bed," he said gruffly. "We need to tell you something," Leah said, her voice trembling. "About Mom." Nicholas wheeled his chair around to face them fully. "What about her?" The twins exchanged a look before Lonnie spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "The night before Mom disappeared, we heard men talking. We were supposed to be asleep, but..." "They were arguing with Mom," Leah continued. "She told us to hide under the bed and be very quiet." Nicholas leaned forward. "What did they say?" "They kept asking about something Mom took," Lonnie said. "Papers or files, we think." "One name kept coming up," Leah added. "Garrett Vaughn. They said he was looking for her." Nicholas felt the blood drain from his face. Garrett Vaughn. The name hit him like a physical blow. Vaughn was one of the most powerful men in the city, a business titan known for his ruthless tactics. Nicholas had almost partnered with him years ago, but something had felt off about the deal. He'd backed out at the last minute. Are you sure that was the name? Nicholas asked, his voice hoarse. Both girls nodded solemnly. Mom looked scared when they said his name, Lonnie whispered. Really scared. Nicholas's mind raced. If Vaughn was involved, this was bigger than he'd imagined. The pieces were starting to fit together. Bella's disappearance years ago, her apparent life in hiding, her current disappearance. What had she discovered about Vaughn? What had she taken? He looked at the twins, really looked at them. They were so small, so vulnerable, yet they'd already seen too much. Their eyes held a wariness that no child should have to carry. "Did your mother ever mention me?" he asked suddenly, surprising himself. The girls exchanged another look. "Sometimes," Leah said carefully. "When she thought we were sleeping, she'd look at her pendant and cry." Nicholas felt something crack in his carefully constructed walls. All these years, he'd believed he was the wronged party. But what if he'd been wrong? What if Bella had been protecting him by leaving? The security system beeped again, reminding him of the immediate threat. Someone was out there, watching, waiting, and somehow it all connected to Garrett Vaughn. Nicholas paced his study, his mind racing with possibilities. Each step on the polished hardwood echoed like accusations in the quiet room. The twins' revelation about Garrett Vaughn had shaken loose memories he'd tried hard to bury. "Sir?" Ms. Wilkins appeared at the doorway, her face tight with concern. "There's something you need to see." She held out a plain white envelope, unremarkable except for the fact that it hadn't come through regular mail. Nicholas took it, noting there was no name, no address, just a sealed envelope that felt too heavy with meaning. His fingers trembled slightly as he tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper with words that made his blood run cold. "Stop looking for Bella, or you'll be next." "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice rough. "It was slipped under the front door, sir. I found it during my morning rounds." Nicholas sank into his leather chair, the note crumpling in his fist. Someone knew he was asking questions. Someone was watching his every move. "Mr. Calloway?" Leah's small voice drew his attention to the doorway where both twins stood in their oversized borrowed clothes. They looked so lost, so fragile. "You shouldn't be here," he said automatically, but his voice lacked its usual steel. The girls padded into the room anyway, their bare feet silent on the expensive carpet. Lonnie clutched her sister's hand, her eyes fixed on the crumpled paper in Nicholas's hand. "Is it about Mom?" Leah asked, her young face too serious for her age. Nicholas hesitated, then nodded. There was no point lying to them. They'd already seen too much of the world's darkness. "Did you really love her?" Lonnie's quiet question hit him like a physical blow. "I dot." Nicholas started, then stopped. The memories flooded back. Bella's smile, her laugh, the way she'd challenge him when everyone else just agreed with whatever he said. "If you loved her," Leah continued, her voice small but steady, "why didn't you help her?" The question hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Nicholas stared at the twins, their innocent faces somehow holding all the wisdom and judgment of the world. He opened his mouth to defend himself, to explain about betrayal and business and pride, but no words came. Why hadn't he helped her? Why hadn't he listened? The questions he'd avoided for years now demanded answers. "I thought," he began, then shook his head. "I was wrong. I was so wrong." Ms. Wilkins moved quietly around the room, straightening things that didn't need straightening, but Nicholas knew she was listening. She'd been there during those dark days after Bella left, watching him build his walls higher and higher. "Mom always said people make mistakes," Lonnie offered softly, "but it's never too late to fix them." Nicholas looked at the threatening note in his hand, then at the twins who had somehow worked their way past his defenses. The truth hit him with stunning clarity. Bella hadn't betrayed him. She'd been running from something or someone, and instead of helping her, he'd pushed her away. "She needed me," he whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "And I failed her." "You can help her now," Leah said, hope lighting up her young face. "You can find her." The threatening note crackled in his grip, a reminder of the danger. But looking at these two little girls who had braved the cold and darkness to find help for their mother, Nicholas felt something shift inside him. The carefully constructed walls of indifference began to crack. "It's dangerous," he said, more to himself than to them. "Mom says being brave means being scared but doing the right thing anyway," Lonnie replied with simple wisdom. Nicholas looked at the twins, really looked at them. In their faces, he could see echoes of Bella, her determination, her courage, her heart. He'd let her down once. He wouldn't do it again. Nicholas stared at the threatening note until the words blurred together. His fingers traced the sharp edges of the paper as memories of Bella flooded his mind. Her smile, her determination, the way she'd looked at him that last day before everything fell apart. "Sir?" Ms. Wilkins' voice cut through his thoughts. She stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, watching him with knowing eyes. "Those girls need answers, and maybe you do too." "This isn't my problem," Nicholas said, but his voice lacked conviction. Ms. Wilkins stepped into the room, her usual respectful distance forgotten. "For 15 years I've watched you build these walls, Mr. Calloway, running from whatever happened with Bella. Maybe it's time you finally face what you ran from." Nicholas turned to the window, watching the snow fall outside. The twins were in the garden, bundled up in coats that were too big for them, making tiny snowmen. Their innocent laughter drifted up to his office. "I need to make a call," he said finally. 20 minutes later, his car pulled up to a familiar building downtown. James Holloway's office hadn't changed, still all glass and steel, trying too hard to impress. The secretary recognized Nicholas immediately, her eyes widening. "Mr. Holloway will see you now," she said, not even checking if he had an appointment. James Holloway stood at his window just as Nicholas had done earlier. He turned slowly, his expensive suit unable to hide his surprise. "Nicholas Calloway," Holloway said, gesturing to a chair. "This is unexpected. I need information about Garrett Vaughn." Holloway's face changed instantly. The polite smile vanished, replaced by something harder. "Why would you ask about him?" "He's connected to someone I used to know, Bella Thompson." "Bella?" Holloway sank into his chair, suddenly looking older. "Nicholas, whatever connection you had with her, let it go. Vaughn doesn't just erase problems, he buries them." "What does that mean?" Nicholas leaned forward, his heart pounding. Holloway poured himself a drink with shaking hands. 5 years ago, Bella discovered something that could destroy certain powerful people. She came to me for help, but He took a long sip. "I was a coward, I turned her away." Nicholas felt the floor shift beneath him. "What did she discover?" "Documents. Proof of corruption that went all the way to the top. Names, dates, transactions, everything." Holloway's voice dropped to a whisper. "Vaughn was sent to retrieve them. But Bella, she was always smarter than anyone gave her credit for. She disappeared with everything." The pieces started falling into place. The way Bella had suddenly changed all those years ago, her secretive phone calls, her fear. "She wasn't betraying me," Nicholas said, the truth hitting him like a physical blow. "She was protecting herself, and I threw her out." "She's been running ever since," Holloway confirmed, "keeping those documents safe. And now?" He gestured helplessly. "Now Vaughn's found her." Nicholas finished, his mouth dry. "If he has her, Nicholas." Holloway didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Nicholas stood up, his mind racing. Bella hadn't betrayed him. She'd been protecting something valuable, something worth killing for, and he'd abandoned her when she needed him most. The twins' faces flashed in his mind. They weren't just some lost children. They were Bella's last line of defense, sent to the one place she thought they might be safe. To him. "Where would Vaughn take her?" Nicholas demanded. Holloway shook his head. "Don't, Nicholas, you don't know what you're getting into." But Nicholas was already heading for the door. He knew exactly what he was getting into, and this time, He wouldn't let Bella face it alone. Nicholas's office was a mess of scattered papers and open files. He'd been searching for hours, pulling out old documents from his private safe, trying to piece together the puzzle of Bella's disappearance. His usually immaculate desk looked like a tornado had hit it. Ms. Wilkins brought him his third cup of coffee, concern etched on her weathered face. "Sir, you haven't eaten since breakfast." "I need to find it," he muttered, barely acknowledging her presence. His fingers trembled slightly as he opened another folder. Then he saw it, the contract from 5 years ago. The merger agreement with Holloway Industries that he'd rejected at the last minute. The pages felt heavy in his hands as memories washed over him. "Nicholas, please," Bella had begged that day, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Don't sign it. There's something wrong with this deal." He remembered how cold his voice had been. "Wrong? The only thing wrong is that you're trying to sabotage my company. I would never—" "Get out." His words had cut through the air like ice. "I don't want to see you again." Back in the present, Nicholas's hand shook as he spread the contract pages across his desk. Something caught his eye, a detail he'd missed before. The signature line where Bella's name should have been remained blank. "She never signed it," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "All this time." The sound of small feet padding across the carpet made him look up. Leah and Lonnie stood in the doorway, their matching blue dresses making them look like tiny angels. They'd been so quiet, he hadn't heard them come in. "What's that?" Leah asked, pointing at the papers. Before Nicholas could answer, Lonnie wandered to a shelf behind his desk. Her small hand reached for something, and Nicholas realized with a start what she'd found. An old photograph he'd never had the heart to throw away. In the picture, Bella smiled at the camera, her hair catching the sunlight, her eyes full of life. It had been taken at the company picnic just weeks before everything fell apart. The twins gathered around the photograph, their small fingers tracing Bella's face. When they looked up at Nicholas, their eyes were full of questions. "Why do you look sad when you look at her?" Leah asked softly. Nicholas couldn't answer. His throat felt too tight, his chest too heavy. He turned back to the contract, forcing himself to focus on the empty signature line. The truth hit him like a physical blow. Bella hadn't been trying to steal from him or sabotage the deal. She'd been warning him. She must have discovered something about Holloway Industries, something dangerous enough to make her risk everything to stop the merger. And he'd thrown her out without even listening. Ms. Wilkins appeared in the doorway again, her expression softening at the sight of Nicholas staring at the old photograph. "She tried to protect me," Nicholas said, his voice barely audible. "All these years, I thought. But she was trying to save me from making a terrible mistake." The twins moved closer, their small hands finding his. Despite himself, Nicholas felt his fingers curl around theirs. "She's still protecting people," Lonnie whispered. "That's why the bad men are looking for her." Nicholas looked down at the contract again, seeing it with new eyes. Whatever Bella had discovered back then, whatever she'd been trying to warn him about, it was still dangerous enough for Vaughn to hunt her down. He'd failed her once. He wouldn't fail her again. The mansion felt different that night. The usual silence had turned heavy, charged with unspoken truths and growing fear. Nicholas sat in his security room, watching the monitors with tired eyes. The revelation about Bella's innocence weighed on him, making his chest tight with regret. Something flickered on one of the screens. Nicholas leaned forward, frowning. Camera 3, covering the east side of the property, showed nothing but static. Then Camera 4 went dark. "Someone's tampering with the feed," he muttered, reaching for his phone. But before he could call his security team, movement caught his eye on Camera 1. A dark sedan sat across the street, its headlights dimmed to barely a glow. Nicholas's jaw clenched. Without hesitation, he grabbed his coat and headed for the front door. Ms. Wilkins appeared from the kitchen, concern etched on her face. "Sir, where are you going at this hour?" "Lock the doors behind me," he ordered, his voice tight, "and keep an eye on the girls." The night air bit at his face as he strode down his driveway. The car sat there, engine running, like a predator waiting to strike. Nicholas walked straight toward it, his steps purposeful. The sedan's engine revved. Just as Nicholas reached the street, it peeled away, tires squealing against the pavement. The taillights disappeared around the corner, leaving him standing alone in the darkness. Back inside, he found Leah and Lanny sitting in the kitchen with Ms. Wilkins. They were wrapped in matching blankets, sipping hot chocolate. Their small faces looked up at him, and for the first time, he really saw them, saw the fear and hope mixed in their eyes. "Girls," he said, pulling up a chair, "I need to know about the night your mother disappeared." The twins exchanged glances. Leah set down her mug, chocolate mustache marking her upper lip. "Mommy told us to stay with Mrs. Peterson next door," she said softly. "She said she had an important meeting." "She was scared," Lonnie added, her voice barely a whisper. "We could tell. She kept checking the windows." Nicholas leaned forward. "Did she say where she was going?" Leah nodded. "The old warehouse, the one with the broken clock on top." Nicholas's blood ran cold. He knew exactly which warehouse she meant. The abandoned Vaughn Industries storage facility on the edge of town. He'd been there once, years ago, for a meeting with Garrett Vaughn himself. "Did she say who she was meeting?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Lonnie shook her head, clutching her mug tighter. "But she made us memorize a number. Said if anything happened, we should find you and tell you. 7294. The numbers hit Nicholas like a physical blow. It was the code to his private safe, the one where he kept his most sensitive documents. How had Bella known that number? "When Mommy didn't come back," Leah continued, tears welling in her eyes, "Mrs. Peterson called the police, but they couldn't find her. So we ran away," Lonnie finished. "We remembered where you lived from the pictures Mommy kept." Ms. Wilkins, who had been quietly listening, placed gentle hands on the girl's shoulders. "You were very brave to come here." Nicholas stood up, his mind racing. The warehouse, the security code, Vaughn's involvement. It was all connected. Bella must have discovered something in those old contract documents, something worth disappearing for, something worth protecting these girls from. "Mr. Calloway?" Leah's small voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Are you going to help find our mommy?" Nicholas looked down at their hopeful faces, feeling the weight of his past mistakes. He'd failed Bella once by not trusting her. He wouldn't fail her again. "Yes," he said firmly, "I'm going to find her." The drive to the warehouse felt endless. Nicholas gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white as he navigated through the industrial district's empty streets. Streetlights cast eerie shadows across abandoned buildings and chain-link fences. His headlights caught glimpses of graffiti-covered walls and broken windows. The warehouse loomed ahead, its broken clock frozen at 3:17, just as he remembered it. But something was different now. A familiar blue sedan sat crooked near the entrance, its driver's side door hanging open like a broken wing. Nicholas's heart pounded as he parked and approached Bella's car. Glass crunched under his feet. The windows were completely shattered, fragments scattered across the pavement like diamonds in the moonlight. Papers were strewn across the back seat and the glove compartment hung open. "Bella," he whispered, running his hand along the car's cold frame. Signs of a struggle were everywhere. Deep scratches in the paint, a smeared handprint on the hood, a single high-heeled shoe lying nearby. The warehouse's metal door groaned as Nicholas pushed it open. The sound echoed through the vast space, bouncing off rusty machinery and empty storage racks. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing years of dust and neglect. Something caught his eye, a flash of color among the gray. Nicholas moved closer, his breath catching in his throat. A silk scarf lay crumpled on the concrete floor, its delicate pattern marred by dark stains. He recognized it immediately. He'd given it to Bella on her birthday years ago. Nicholas knelt down, fingers trembling as he touched the fabric. The stains were blood, now dried to a rusty brown. His chest tightened with fear and rage. A soft scraping sound made him freeze. Footsteps echoed from somewhere in the darkness, growing closer. Nicholas switched off his flashlight and pressed himself against a nearby column, listening intently. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, only the sound of his own breathing filled the warehouse. Then something whistled through the air. Nicholas ducked just as a metal pipe swung where his head had been. He spun around, catching his attacker's arm mid-swing. The masked figure was strong, but Nicholas had years of boxing training behind him. They grappled in the dim light, crashing into old equipment and sending dust clouds billowing around them. The attacker landed a solid punch to Nicholas's ribs, making him stumble. But Nicholas recovered quickly, driving his shoulder into the man's midsection. They both went down hard. Nicholas's fingers found the edge of the mask and ripped it away. A familiar face snarled up at him. Jack Morrison, one of Vaughn's longtime enforcers. Nicholas had seen him at countless business meetings, always lurking in the background. "Morrison?" Nicholas growled, pinning the man down. "Where is she?" Morrison's laugh was cold and hollow. "Walk away, Calloway." He spat blood onto the concrete. "Or you'll end up just like her." Nicholas slammed him against the floor. "What did you do to her?" "Me?" Morrison's eyes gleamed with malice. "I just follow orders. But Vaughn, he's got plans for people who stick their noses where they don't belong." Nicholas's grip tightened on Morrison's collar. "If you've hurt her..." "You'll what?" Morrison sneered. "Face it, Calloway. You're too late. Just like you were too late to trust her when it mattered." The words hit Nicholas like physical blows. He pulled Morrison closer, their faces inches apart. "Tell me where she is." "Walk away," Morrison repeated, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Those little girls of hers? They'll be next if you don't back off. Vaughn doesn't leave loose ends." Nicholas's blood ran cold at the mention of the twins. Before he could respond, Morrison's knee caught him in the stomach. The enforcer twisted free and disappeared into the darkness, his footsteps echoing through the warehouse. Nicholas stayed on his knees, surrounded by dust and shadows, clutching Bella's blood-stained scarf. The threat hung in the air like poison. Walk away, or everyone he cared about would suffer. Nicholas stumbled out of the warehouse, his ribs aching from Morrison's blows. The threat against the twins echoed in his mind, driving him forward despite the pain. He needed answers, and he knew exactly where to get them. 20 minutes later, he burst through James Holloway's office doors, ignoring the protests of security guards and secretaries. Holloway sat behind his mahogany desk, barely looking up from his papers. "I told you everything I know, Calloway," Holloway said, his voice tired. Nicholas slammed his hands on the desk, scattering papers. "You're lying. Morrison was there. Vaughn's men are involved. And you know why?" Holloway's composed facade cracked slightly. He glanced at the security camera in the corner, then pressed a button on his desk phone. "Cancel my next meeting, Sarah." He stood up, walking to the window. "Close the door, Nicholas." The office fell silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Holloway's shoulders sagged as if carrying a heavy weight. "What I'm about to tell you, it could get us both killed." "Tell me," Nicholas demanded. Holloway turned, his face grim. "Remember that merger you rejected? The one Bella warned you about? It wasn't just a business deal. Vaughn's company. They were using their shipping routes for human trafficking. Bella found out." Nicholas felt the blood drain from his face. "What?" "She discovered documents, payment records, shipping manifests, all the evidence needed to bring down Vaughn's entire operation." Holloway's hands trembled as he poured himself a drink. "When she tried to warn you, Vaughn found out. That's why he turned you against her. He needed you to reject the merger publicly, make it look like a failed business deal rather than him backing out because she knew too much." Nicholas sank into a chair, his world spinning. All these years he'd believed Bella had betrayed him, when she had actually been trying to save him from becoming part of something horrific. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Nicholas's voice was hoarse. "Because Vaughn owns people everywhere, police, judges, politicians. I've kept quiet to stay alive." Holloway downed his drink. "But Bella, she never stopped fighting. She's been gathering evidence for years, building a case strong enough that even Vaughn's connections couldn't save him." Nicholas's phone buzzed. Ms. Wilkins's name flashed on the screen. He answered it, hearing panic in her usually calm voice. Mr. Calloway, she was crying. The girls, they're gone. Nicholas shot to his feet. What do you mean, gone? I was making them lunch. I only stepped away for a moment. Her voice broke. When I came back, the front door was wide open. Their coats are still here. I've looked everywhere. Nicholas was already running for the door. Call the police, I'm on my way. Nicholas, Holloway called after him. Vaughn won't hurt children. He'll use them to get what he wants. But Nicholas was already gone, taking the stairs 2 at a time. His car roared through traffic, running red lights, drawing angry honks from other drivers. None of it mattered. All he could think about was Leah and Lanny, those innocent faces now in the hands of monsters. He screeched to a halt in front of his mansion. Police cars were already there, their lights painting the snow in alternating red and blue. Ms. Wilkins stood on the front steps, wrapped in a shawl, talking to 2 officers. Show me, Nicholas demanded as he rushed past them. The front door hung open, letting in the cold winter air. In the entryway, a small pink mitten lay forgotten on the floor. Nicholas picked it up, his hands shaking. It was still warm. I'm so sorry, Ms. Wilkins sobbed. I should have watched them more carefully. Nicholas clutched the mitten, his jaw clenched tight. First Bella, now the twins. Vaughn had taken everything from him, all because he'd been too blind to see the truth years ago. Sir, one of the officers approached. We found this. He held up a note, written in the same handwriting as the previous threat. Want to see them again? Bring us what Bella stole. Nicholas tore through the mansion, his footsteps echoing through empty halls that had never felt so hollow. Every room he entered sent a fresh wave of panic through his chest. No giggles, no small voices, no sign of the twins who had somehow wormed their way into his heart. Leah! Lonnie! His voice cracked as he called their names. Ms. Wilkins followed behind him, wringing her hands, tears streaming down her weathered face. The police officers spread throughout the property, but Nicholas barely noticed them. His mind raced with images of the girls, Leah's brave face when she'd first arrived at his gate, Lonnie's quiet wisdom as she watched him from across the room. How had he let this happen? The house phone's sharp ring cut through the chaos. Nicholas froze, then lunged for it, his hand trembling as he lifted the receiver. Hello? His voice was raw with fear and anger. Now you know how it feels to lose someone. The voice was deep, cold as winter ice. Nicholas's grip tightened on the phone until his knuckles turned white. If you hurt them, you'll what? The voice chuckled, the sound devoid of warmth. You're in no position to make threats, Calloway. The girls are safe, for now. But their future depends entirely on you. Nicholas pressed his forehead against the wall, trying to steady himself. Let me speak to them. Forget about Bella. The voice continued as if Nicholas hadn't spoken. Walk away, or the girls disappear forever. They're children, Nicholas pleaded, his carefully constructed walls crumbling. They have nothing to do with this. Children, the voice hardened. Like the ones Bella tried to save? The ones she gathered evidence about? Don't play innocent, Calloway. You could have helped her years ago, but you chose your pride instead. The line went dead. Nicholas slammed the phone down, his hands shaking with rage and guilt. For the first time in years, real fear gripped his heart. Not for himself, but for 2 small girls who trusted him to keep them safe. Ms. Wilkins touched his arm gently. Mr. Calloway. He couldn't look at her. I did this, he whispered. I turned my back on Bella when she needed me most. Now Leah and Laney are paying the price. The security system beeped, announcing movement at the front gate. Nicholas rushed to the monitors, watching as a police officer retrieved something small from the ground. Minutes later, the officer handed it to Nicholas. A familiar silver pendant wrapped in torn fabric. His hands trembled as he unwrapped it. The pendant was Bella's, identical to the one in his safe. The fabric was from her dress. He recognized the pattern immediately. It was stained with dirt, but otherwise intact. She's alive, he breathed, clutching the items to his chest. After days of uncertainty, here was proof. Bella was out there, fighting, surviving. Ms. Wilkins examined the fabric. "The stains are fresh," she noted. "This was torn recently." Nicholas stared at the pendant, remembering the day he'd given it to Bella. She'd smiled, kissed him, promised to always wear it. Now it sat in his palm like a weight, heavy with years of regret and missed chances. "She tried to tell me the truth," he said quietly. "About Vaughn, about the trafficking, about all of it. And I wouldn't listen." He closed his fist around the pendant. "I threw her to the wolves." "Then it's time to make it right," Ms. Wilkins said firmly. "Those girls need you. Bella needs you." Nicholas nodded, his jaw set with determination. Fear still coursed through him, but now it was matched by something stronger. Rage at Vaughn, at himself, at years of hiding behind walls of pride and suspicion while others suffered. Nicholas paced his study, the pendant clutched in his trembling hand. Ms. Wilkins stood by the door, her face lined with worry as she watched him. "Please, Mr. Calloway," she pleaded. "We must call the police. Those poor girls." "No." His voice was sharp, final. "The police are useless. Vaughn has half the force in his pocket." He ran his fingers through his disheveled hair, his usually immaculate appearance now showing signs of strain. "I won't risk the girls' lives by bringing in corrupt cops." Ms. Wilkins wrung her hands. "Then what will we do?" Nicholas stared at the pendant, watching it catch the dim light. The silver surface was scratched but still beautiful, just like his memories of Bella. He'd been such a fool, letting his pride blind him to the truth. Now 2 innocent children were paying the price. He reached for his phone, scrolling through contacts he hadn't touched in years. There was one person who might know something, someone who lived in the shadows between legitimate business and criminal enterprise. "Raymond Knox," he muttered, pressing the call button. The phone rang 3 times before a gravelly voice answered. Well, Nicholas Calloway. Never thought I'd hear from you again." "Knox, I need information." Nicholas's voice was tight with urgency. "It's about Garrett Vaughn." A low whistle came through the speaker. "Dangerous territory, my friend. What's got you poking that hornet's nest?" Nicholas closed his eyes, seeing Leah's brave face and Laney's quiet wisdom. "He has 2 little girls. And..." He swallowed hard. "He has Bella." "Bella Thompson?" Knox's voice sharpened with interest. "The one who..." "Yes," Nicholas cut him off. "That Bella." There was a long pause. "Meet me at the old marina. 1 hour. Come alone." The marina was deserted when Nicholas arrived. Nothing but moonlight reflecting off the dark water. Knox emerged from the shadows like a ghost, his weathered face grave. "You look terrible," Knox said by way of greeting. "The girls, Knox, what do you know?" Knox lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his face. "Vaughn's been bragging about having Bella. Says he's teaching her a lesson about keeping her nose out of his business." He took a long drag. "But here's the thing. He's in a panic right now. Those twins you mentioned? He doesn't have them." Nicholas felt his heart skip. "What?" "Someone snatched them right from under his men's noses." Knox's eyes glinted in the darkness. "Someone who's been working against Vaughn for years, building evidence, protecting witnesses." "Who?" "Don't know for sure." Knox flicked ash into the water. "But word is there's a network. People Vaughn's hurt, people he's tried to silence. They've been waiting for a chance to bring him down." Nicholas's mind raced. Could it be possible? Had someone rescued the twins before Vaughn's men could take them? "Why didn't they contact me?" he demanded. Knox gave him a hard look. "Would you have trusted them if they did?" The great Nicholas Calloway, who turned his back on Bella when she tried to warn him about Vaughn. The words hit Nicholas like physical blows. He gripped the railing, feeling the cold metal bite into his palms. "The twins are safe," Knox continued. "That's what matters, but Bella..." He shook his head. "Vaughn's got her locked away somewhere, and he's not planning to keep her alive much longer." Nicholas straightened, his jaw set. "Tell me everything you know, every property, every hideout Vaughn might use." "It's suicide to go after him alone. I'm not leaving her there." Nicholas's voice was steel. Not again. Knox studied him for a long moment, then nodded. All right. But remember, you're not the only one fighting Vaughn. Keep your eyes open. Your allies might be closer than you think. The warehouse loomed against the night sky, its broken windows like dark eyes staring down at Nicholas. His heart pounded as he gripped his gun, moving silently through the shadows. Knox's tip had led him here, but the stillness felt wrong. The metal door creaked as he eased it open. Moonlight filtered through holes in the roof, casting strange patterns on the concrete floor. Empty crates and rusty machinery created a maze of potential hiding spots. Leah! Laney, he whispered, his voice barely audible. A small sound echoed from deeper inside, a child's whimper. Nicholas moved faster, staying close to the walls. As he rounded a corner, he saw them. The twins huddled together on a dirty mattress, their small forms trembling. "Uncle Nicholas!" Leah called out, her voice shaking. Something in her tone made him freeze. It wasn't relief in her voice. It was warning. The attack came from all sides. Dark figures emerged from behind crates and pillars, their faces hidden behind black masks. Nicholas spun, firing 2 shots, but more attackers kept coming. A fist caught his jaw, sending him stumbling. He blocked another punch, drove his elbow into someone's ribs, but there were too many. "Get the girls out," one of the masked men shouted, his voice rough. Nicholas fought harder, desperate to reach the twins. A blow to his knee sent him down. His gun skittered across the floor. Through the chaos, he saw someone grabbing Leah and Laney. "No!" he roared, struggling against the hands holding him. Then something changed. One of the smaller masked figures moved with startling speed, turning on the other attackers. The newcomers' movements were precise, deadly. 3 men went down in seconds. A 4th tried to draw a weapon but crumpled from a swift kick. Nicholas seized his chance. He broke free, taking down 2 more attackers. The mysterious fighter moved in perfect sync with him, as if they'd fought together before. Within moments, the remaining assailants lay groaning on the floor. Breathing hard, Nicholas turned to his unexpected ally. The figure stood perfectly still, facing him. Something about their stance, the way they held themselves. His hands shook as he reached for their mask. The person didn't resist. As he pulled it away, dark hair spilled out, framing a face he'd seen in his dreams and nightmares for years. "Bella," he whispered. She looked different, harder, more dangerous, but her eyes were the same. They blazed with an intensity that made his chest ache. "You're alive," he breathed. "Mom." The twins broke free from their hiding spot and ran to her. Bella caught them in her arms, holding them tight, but her eyes never left Nicholas's face. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking. "I should have believed you. I should have—" "Not now," Bella cut him off. Her voice was rough, like she hadn't used it much lately. "Vaughn's men will be here soon. These were just his advance team." Nicholas stared at the fallen attackers. "You've been fighting him all this time?" "Someone had to." Her words carried years of bitterness. "While you were hiding in your mansion, Vaughn was destroying lives. I couldn't let him hurt anyone else." Leah tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mom, we have to tell him about the others." "Others?" Nicholas asked. Bella hesitated, then nodded. "There's a network of us. People Vaughn hurt. People he tried to silence. We've been gathering evidence, protecting his targets." Her eyes hardened. "And now we're ready to take him down." A sound outside made them all tense, car engines growing closer. "We need to move," Bella said, already herding the twins toward a hidden exit. She looked back at Nicholas, her expression unreadable. "Are you coming?" Nicholas looked at her, really looked at her. Gone was the innocent woman he'd loved. In her place stood a warrior, someone who'd fought darkness while he'd hidden from the truth. He nodded, following her into the shadows. The old motel loomed against the darkening sky, its neon sign long dead. Nicholas pulled their stolen car behind the building, away from the road. Bella winced as she stepped out, her hand pressed against her side where one of Vaughn's men had landed a blow. "Mom, you're hurt," Lonnie whispered, her small face creased with worry. "I'm fine, sweetheart." Bella tried to smile, but Nicholas saw the pain in her eyes. Blood seeped through her fingers. "You need a hospital," he insisted, reaching for her. Bella jerked away. "No hospitals. Vaughn has people everywhere. We'd be dead before morning." They found a room at the end of the row, its door hanging loose on rusty hinges. Inside, dust covered everything. Moonlight filtered through torn curtains, casting strange shadows on the peeling wallpaper. "Leah, Lonnie, check the bathroom for a first aid kit," Nicholas ordered. The twins nodded and scurried off, their footsteps echoing in the empty room. Bella sank onto the bed, her face pale. Nicholas knelt beside her, his heart aching at how different she looked from the woman he'd known years ago. Her eyes were harder now, her movements those of someone used to fighting. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked softly. "About Vaughn, about what you found?" Bella laughed bitterly. "I tried, but you were so convinced he was your friend." She closed her eyes, memories washing over her face. "I found the documents by accident. Shipping manifests, bank transfers, proof that Vaughn was using your company to move illegal goods." Nicholas remembered that day clearly. Bella had burst into his office, clutching papers, trying to warn him. But he'd been blind, trusting Vaughn's smooth explanations over her desperate pleas. "I was a fool," he whispered. "You were." Bella's voice was sharp. "But I didn't disappear because you hurt me. I left because Vaughn's men were coming for you." Nicholas stared at her. "What?" "They knew I had evidence. They threatened to kill you if I didn't hand it over." Her hands trembled. "So I ran. I knew they'd follow me instead of targeting you." The twins returned with a dusty first aid kit. As Nicholas helped clean Bella's wound, Leah clutched her teddy bear tighter. "Mom," she said, "should we show him?" Bella hesitated, then nodded. "Give me Theodore." Nicholas watched, confused, as Bella carefully opened a hidden seam in the teddy bear's back. She pulled out a small USB drive. "Everything's here," she said. "Every illegal transaction, every murder Vaughn ordered, every life he destroyed. I've spent years gathering more evidence, building a case that even his bought judges couldn't ignore." Nicholas took the drive, his hands shaking. "This is what you've been protecting? What you sacrificed everything for?" "Not everything." Bella pulled the twins close. "I found Leah and Lonnie in one of Vaughn's warehouses. Their parents." She swallowed hard. "They were witnesses. Vaughn had them killed. I couldn't leave the girls there." "You saved us," Lonnie whispered, snuggling closer to Bella. Nicholas looked at them, this small, fierce family forged in darkness. He remembered the cold, empty halls of his mansion, the years he'd spent hiding from the truth. Shame burned in his chest. "I should have trusted you," he said. "I should have protected you." "You can protect us now," Bella replied, her eyes meeting his. "Help me finish this. Help me take Vaughn down." Nicholas nodded, gripping the USB drive that held the key to their redemption. Outside, the wind howled through the empty parking lot, carrying secrets and shadows. But in this dusty room, surrounded by broken furniture and peeling walls, something long buried began to heal. In the dim motel room, Leah and Lonnie slept soundly between Nicholas and Bella, their small hands gripping Bella's shirt as if afraid she might disappear again. Nicholas watched them, his heart heavy with regret and newfound understanding. "Tell me everything," he whispered to Bella, careful not to wake the girls. Bella's fingers traced gentle circles on Lonnie's back as she spoke. "Vaughn caught up with me 3 nights ago. His men cornered me outside my apartment." Her voice trembled slightly. "They were going to kill me, make it look like a robbery gone wrong. But I'd prepared for that moment. I fought back, managed to escape through the building's service entrance." Nicholas's jaw clenched. "And the twins' mother?" "Sarah Matthews," Bella said softly. She worked in Vaughn's accounting department. She noticed discrepancies in the books, started asking questions. She closed her eyes, pain etching lines around her mouth. "They found her car in the river 2 days later. The police called it an accident." "The twins were witnesses?" They were hiding in their mother's office when Vaughn's men came for her. They saw everything. Bella pulled the girls closer. I found them huddled in a storage closet. I couldn't leave them there, Nicholas. They were just babies. Nicholas reached across the sleeping children, his hand finding Bella's. I was so wrong, he said. All this time, I thought you were the threat. But you were protecting everyone, weren't you? I never stopped, she admitted. Even after you turned your back on me, I kept gathering evidence. I knew someday Vaughn would slip up, make a mistake that would bring him down. Nicholas pulled out his phone, his fingers hovering over Raymond Knox's number. We need to get you and the girls out of the country. Knox can help with new identities, passports. No, Bella interrupted. I won't run anymore. These girls deserve a real life, not one spent looking over their shoulders. Bella, be reasonable. A sharp crack split the air. Both adults froze. Outside, gravel crunched under heavy boots. Mom? Leah stirred, her eyes opening with fear. Nicholas crept to the window, carefully pulling back the torn curtain. His blood ran cold. Black SUVs blocked every exit from the parking lot. Men in dark clothing moved through the shadows, weapons drawn. They've found us, he breathed. Bella was already moving, shaking the twins fully awake. Leah, Lonnie, remember what we practiced? The quiet game? The girls nodded, their faces serious beyond their years. They slipped off the bed without a sound, pressing themselves against the wall beside the bathroom door. Nicholas pulled out his phone again, this time dialing Knox's number. Ray? We need immediate extraction. The old Palmer Motel, south side of town. Vaughn's men are here. How many? Knox's voice crackled through the speaker. Nicholas counted quickly. At least 12 that I can see. They've got us surrounded. Hold tight, I'm 15 minutes out. We don't have 15 minutes, Nicholas growled, ending the call. Footsteps approached their door. Bella moved silently, positioning herself between the twins and the entrance. Nicholas raised his gun, aiming at the door's center. Take the girls through the bathroom window, he whispered to Bella. I'll hold them off. Nicola, go, he hissed. I won't let you down again. The doorknob began to turn. Nicholas's finger tightened on the trigger. Behind him, he heard Bella ushering the twins toward the bathroom, their movements barely audible. The door burst open. The motel room erupted in chaos. Nicholas fired 2 precise shots, dropping the first men through the door. Bella grabbed Leah while Nicholas scooped up Lonnie, both adults moving with desperate speed. Hold tight, sweetheart, Nicholas whispered to Lanny, who buried her face in his shoulder. The little girl trembled but didn't make a sound. They burst through the bathroom window, glass shattering around them. Nicholas's back hit the ground first, cushioning Lonnie's fall. Bella landed beside them. Leah clutched protectively against her chest. Gunfire peppered the wall above them. Nicholas rolled to his feet, pulling Bella up with his free hand. They ran through the darkness, weaving between parked cars. This way, Bella called, leading them toward a chain-link fence at the property's edge. She knew every escape route. She'd been planning for this moment for years. They reached Nicholas's car, hidden in the shadows of an old billboard. Nicholas fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking as he tried to shield Lonnie from the cold night air. Get in, he urged, helping Bella secure the twins in the back seat. More shots rang out behind them. The engine roared to life. Nicholas floored the accelerator, tires squealing against wet pavement. In the rearview mirror, he saw Vaughn's men scrambling to their vehicles. We can't keep running, Nicholas said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. These girls deserve better than a life on the run. Bella pulled out the USB drive from the teddy bear. This is everything. Bank records, offshore accounts, proof of murder. Enough to put Vaughn away forever. Nicholas made a sharp turn onto the highway. I know someone. FBI agent Daniel Monroe. He's one of the few honest ones left. 20 minutes later, they sat in a 24-hour diner, the twins huddled together over hot chocolate. Nicholas paced while talking on the phone with Monroe. This better be good, Calloway. Monroe's gruff voice came through the speaker. You know what happened to the last agent who tried to build a case against Vaughn? It's all here, Daniel. Everything you need: bank statements, video footage, witness testimonies. Nicholas glanced at Bella, who nodded encouragingly. If you go after Vaughn, Monroe warned, his voice heavy with concern, he won't just retaliate, he'll make you disappear. I don't care anymore, Nicholas replied firmly. I'm done running. These girls need a real life, not a lifetime of looking over their shoulders. Just then, Nicholas's phone buzzed with another call. Ms. Wilkins's name flashed on the screen. Ms. Wilkins? He answered, relief flooding his voice. But that relief turned to ice as he heard her frightened breathing. Mr. Calloway, she whispered, her voice trembling. They're here. They have me. Nicholas's blood ran cold. Who has you? Vaughn's men. A muffled sob. They say if you don't come alone to the old factory on River Street, they'll... Her voice broke. Listen to me, Nicholas said firmly, trying to keep his voice steady. I'm coming for you. Just hold on. The line went dead. Nicholas looked at Bella, who had already read the situation on his face. No, she said firmly, it's a trap. I know. Nicholas ran a hand through his hair. But she's family. She's all I had before. He looked at the twins, who were watching him with wide, worried eyes. Before you all came back into my life. Bella stood up, her expression determined. Then we do this together. We end this tonight. No, Nicholas shook his head. I need you to take the girls and the evidence to Monroe. Keep them safe. This is something I have to do alone. Leah reached out and grabbed Nicholas's hand. Please don't leave, she whispered, her small voice cracking. Nicholas knelt beside her, gently squeezing her tiny hand. I promise I'll come back. We're family now, remember? The abandoned construction site loomed against the night sky, a skeleton of steel beams and concrete floors. Nicholas's footsteps echoed as he walked through the empty space, his heart pounding but his face showing nothing but cold determination. That's far enough, Calloway. Vaughn's voice cut through the darkness. He emerged from behind a concrete pillar, one arm wrapped around Ms. Wilkins's throat, the other pressing a gun to her temple. Ms. Wilkins whimpered softly, but her eyes held steady as they met Nicholas's. Even now, she was trying to be brave for him. The sight made his chest ache. Let her go, Vaughn, Nicholas said, his voice steady despite the rage burning in his chest. She has nothing to do with this. Vaughn laughed, the sound bouncing off the bare walls. Oh, but she does. Everyone in your life has something to do with this. He tightened his grip on Ms. Wilkins. You were always so predictable, Calloway. So easy to manipulate. All I had to do was threaten someone you care about, and here you are. Nicholas kept his hands visible, making no sudden moves. The weight of the USB drive felt heavy in his pocket. He thought of Bella and the twins, safely hidden away. At least he hoped they were safe. You want the drive? Nicholas reached slowly into his pocket. Here it is. All your dirty secrets. Everything Bella collected. He held up the small black device. Throw it over, Vaughn commanded, his eyes gleaming with triumph. Nicholas tossed the drive. It clattered across the concrete floor, stopping at Vaughn's feet. With a cruel smile, Vaughn brought his shoe down hard, crushing the device into pieces. You really thought I didn't have backups? Vaughn's laughter echoed through the empty building again. You're in over your head, Calloway. Always have been. You're just a businessman playing at being a hero. Ms. Wilkins caught Nicholas's eye. He gave her the smallest nod, and she understood. In one swift motion, she dropped her weight, throwing Vaughn off balance. The air exploded with sound. Glass shattered as black-clad figures rappelled through the windows. Red laser sights danced across the walls as FBI SWAT team members swarmed the site. FBI, drop your weapon! Vaughn's face contorted with rage as he realized what had happened. The USB drive had been a decoy. Nicholas had never intended to hand over the real evidence. You set me up, Vaughn snarled, his gun wavering between Nicholas and the advancing SWAT team. Like you said, Nicholas replied, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. I'm predictable, and you predictably fell for it. Ms. Wilkins took advantage of Vaughn's distraction to wrench herself free, running toward Nicholas. He caught her, pulling her behind him as the SWAT team closed in. "It's over, Vaughn," Nicholas said, watching as the man who had caused so much pain was surrounded by armed agents. "You were so busy watching me, you never noticed Agent Monroe's team setting up outside." Vaughn's face twisted with fury as two agents forced him to his knees, cuffing his hands behind his back. "This isn't over, Calloway. You have no idea what you're dealing with." "Actually," Nicholas replied calmly, "for once I know exactly what I'm dealing with." He turned to Ms. Wilkins, checking her for injuries. "Are you all right?" She nodded, her hands shaking but her voice firm. "I knew you'd come. But how did you know they wouldn't find the real evidence?" "Because the real USB drive is already with the FBI," Nicholas explained, watching as Vaughn was led away. "Monroe's team has been building their case for hours. We just needed Vaughn to show his hand." The sound of sirens filled the air as more FBI vehicles arrived. Red and blue lights painted the construction site in alternating colors, illuminating the end of Vaughn's reign of terror. The construction site erupted into chaos as FBI agents swarmed in from every direction. Gunfire crackled through the air, bullets pinging off steel beams and concrete pillars. Nicholas pulled Ms. Wilkins behind a stack of metal pipes, shielding her from the mayhem. "Stay down," he shouted over the deafening exchange of gunfire. Vaughn's men had taken positions throughout the building, returning fire at the advancing FBI teams. Through the flashing lights and gun smoke, Nicholas caught glimpses of black-clad agents methodically working their way through the structure. Agent Monroe's voice boomed over a megaphone. "This is the FBI. Drop your weapons." More shots rang out in response. Nicholas watched as one of Vaughn's men fell, clutching his shoulder. Another was tackled by two agents, his weapon skittering across the floor. But where was Vaughn? A movement caught Nicholas's eye. Through the haze, he spotted Vaughn slipping away toward the elevator shaft. The man was using the chaos as cover for his escape. "He's heading for the stairs!" Nicholas called out to Monroe, who was coordinating the assault from behind a concrete barrier. "Go!" Monroe shouted back. "We've got this covered!" Nicholas squeezed Ms. Wilkins's shoulder. "Stay with Agent Monroe. You'll be safe." She nodded, her eyes wide but determined. "Be careful, Nicholas." He sprinted after Vaughn, ducking under crossfire and weaving through the battlefield the construction site had become. Ahead, he could hear Vaughn's footsteps pounding up the metal stairs. Monroe had caught up to Vaughn first, cutting him off at a landing between floors. "It's over, Vaughn. Hands where I can see them." But Vaughn wasn't finished. In one fluid motion, he produced a knife from his sleeve. The blade flashed in the emergency lights as he slashed at the nearest agent, catching him across the chest. The agent went down with a cry of pain. Monroe fired, but Vaughn was already moving, shouldering through a plastic barrier onto an unfinished floor. Nicholas followed, his shoes crunching on scattered construction debris. The chase led them higher and higher, past floor after floor of bare concrete and exposed wiring. Nicholas's lungs burned, but he didn't slow down. He couldn't let Vaughn escape, not after everything. Finally, they burst out onto the rooftop. The night air was thin and cold this high up, the city spread out below them, a glittering carpet of lights. Vaughn stood at the edge, his back to a 40-story drop. "Give it up, Vaughn," Nicholas called out, advancing slowly. "There's nowhere left to run." Vaughn's face was twisted with rage and desperation. "You think you've won? You think this ends with me?" He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You have no idea what's really going on, Calloway." "I know enough," Nicholas replied, taking another step forward. "I know you tried to destroy Bella's life. You threatened those children. You hurt innocent people." "Innocent?" Vaughn spat. "There are no innocent people in this game, just players and pawns." Nicholas was only a few feet away now. "The game's over." A glint of red light caught his eye, a laser sight dancing across his chest. Nicholas's instincts screamed at him to move. The crack of a sniper rifle split the night. Nicholas threw himself sideways as concrete exploded where he had been standing. Another shot followed, missing him by inches. "You see?" Vaughn shouted over the wind. "You think I'm the puppet master? I'm just another piece on the board." Nicholas scrambled behind an air conditioning unit as more shots rang out. The sniper was somewhere in the surrounding buildings, but he couldn't spot them. This wasn't just about Vaughn anymore. Someone else was pulling the strings, someone who wanted Nicholas dead. The night had just become much more dangerous. Nicholas stumbled through the door of the safe house, his left arm clutched against his side where the sniper's bullet had grazed him. The wound wasn't deep, but it stung like fire. His clothes were covered in concrete dust and blood, some his, some from helping the injured FBI agent. Bella rushed to him the moment he entered, her face a mix of relief and anger. Behind her, Leah and Lanny sat huddled on a worn couch, their small faces pinched with worry. "You're hurt," Bella said, quickly examining his wound. Her touch was gentle, but her voice was hard. "What were you thinking, going after Vaughn alone?" "I wasn't alone," Nicholas winced as she helped him to a chair. "The FBI was there. We had him cornered." "Had him?" Bella's eyes narrowed. "What happened?" Agent Monroe stepped in behind Nicholas, his suit dusty and tie askew. "Vaughn escaped. Someone was covering him. Professional sniper. Nearly took Calloway's head off." The twins whimpered at this, and Bella shot Monroe a sharp look. She went to the girls, wrapping her arms around them. "It's okay, sweethearts. Everything's fine." "Nothing about this is fine," Nicholas growled, accepting the first aid kit Ms. Wilkins brought over. "Vaughn was ready for us. He knew we were coming." Monroe nodded grimly. "This goes deeper than we thought. Vaughn isn't calling the shots. He's just a front man. Someone with serious resources is backing him." Nicholas watched as Bella's face went pale. She whispered something to the twins, who nodded and followed Ms. Wilkins to the kitchen for hot chocolate. "Bella?" Nicholas recognized that look. "What aren't you telling me?" She stood there for a long moment, her hands clenched into fists. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled with suppressed emotion. "I know who's behind this. I've always known." Nicholas felt his heart skip a beat. "What do you mean?" "The same man who framed me years ago," Bella said, her eyes meeting his. "The man who made you believe I betrayed you. He's the one pulling Vaughn's strings." "Who?" Nicholas demanded, standing despite the pain in his side. "James Holloway." The name hit Nicholas like a physical blow. Holloway, his old business rival, the man he'd just visited for information, the man who had pretended to help him. "That's impossible," Nicholas said, but even as the words left his mouth, pieces started falling into place. The way Holloway had warned him about Vaughn, steering him toward the warehouse. The convenient information that had led to tonight's ambush. "Holloway orchestrated everything," Bella continued, her voice growing stronger. "Years ago he wanted to destroy you, but he needed to isolate you first. So he planted evidence making it look like I was stealing from you, feeding information to your competitors." Monroe was already on his phone, barking orders. "I want everything we have on James Holloway now." "When you rejected me, cut me off, that's exactly what Holloway wanted," Bella said, pain evident in her voice. "But I discovered proof of what he was doing, not just to you, but to dozens of other companies. He's been using Vaughn as his enforcer, eliminating anyone who gets too close to the truth." Nicholas sank back into his chair, the weight of his past mistakes crushing him. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I tried," Bella's eyes filled with tears. "But you wouldn't listen. You were so convinced I had betrayed you. And then I found out about the twins. Their mother was one of Holloway's victims. I couldn't let them end up in the system, not with Holloway's people everywhere, so I took them, kept them safe." "And now Holloway knows they're with you," Nicholas said, understanding dawning. "He knows they're living proof of his crimes." Bella nodded, wiping her eyes. "That's why he sent Vaughn after us. That's why he wants us all dead." The silence in the safe house was deafening as Bella's words hung in the air. Nicholas's mind raced, memories of his years working with James Holloway flooding back, the mentorship, the guidance, the trust he'd placed in the man who had shaped his business career. "Holloway?" Nicholas's voice was barely a whisper. "All this time?" Bella wrapped her arms around herself as if trying to hold herself together. He was the puppet master from the beginning. Everything. The fake evidence against me. The threats, Vaughn's involvement, it was all orchestrated by him. Nicholas ran his hand through his hair, wincing at the pain in his side. But why? Why go through all this? Money laundering, Bella said, her voice growing stronger. Human trafficking. Holloway needed legitimate businesses to hide his operations. When companies wouldn't cooperate, he'd send Vaughn to handle things. From the kitchen, they could hear Ms. Wilkins talking softly to the twins, the gentle clink of spoons against mugs as they stirred their hot chocolate. The domestic sounds felt surreal against the weight of Bella's revelations. The twins' mother, Nicholas said slowly. She worked for one of those companies? Bella nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. Sarah Martinez. She was an accountant who noticed irregularities in the books. She was going to report it, but she swallowed hard. They found her body 3 days later. The twins were hiding in a closet. They saw everything. Nicholas felt sick. How many times had he sat across from Holloway in his mahogany-paneled office, sharing drinks and talking about business strategies? How many deals had he made, never suspecting the darkness beneath the surface? I was stupid, Nicholas said, self-loathing evident in his voice. When he showed me those documents, claiming you were stealing from the company. He knew exactly how to play you, Bella said softly. He knew you had trust issues from your past. He used that against you. Nicholas stood up, pacing despite the pain. And I fell for it. I threw you out without even listening to your side. He stopped, turning to face her. Bella, I'm so... But something caught his eye. A tiny red light, barely visible in the corner of the room, blinking steadily. His blood ran cold. Don't move, he said quietly, his eyes fixed on the light. Don't react. Bella tensed, reading the urgency in his voice. What is it? Nicholas casually walked toward the window as if stretching his legs. Top corner, near the ceiling. We're being watched. Bella's face went pale, but she maintained her composure. How long? Could have been here before we arrived, Nicholas said, keeping his voice low. Which means... Holloway knows where we are, Bella finished, her hand instinctively moving toward the kitchen where the twins were. Nicholas's mind raced. The safe house wasn't safe at all. Holloway had been watching their every move, probably listening to their entire conversation. They needed to get out, but they couldn't let on that they'd discovered the camera. Keep talking, Nicholas muttered, moving closer to Bella. Act normal. I'll get the twins and Ms. Wilkins. We need to leave, but we can't rush. Any sudden movements will tip them off. Bella nodded almost imperceptibly, then forced a laugh as if Nicholas had said something amusing. You should sit down, she said loudly. Let me check that wound again. The tiny red light continued to blink, watching, recording. Somewhere, Nicholas knew, Holloway was probably viewing everything, planning his next move. The man who had mentored him, who had shaped his business career, was now orchestrating their destruction. They were trapped in a deadly game, and Holloway had just proven he was several steps ahead of them. Nicholas moved with calculated calm, gathering only essential items while maintaining casual conversation with Bella. His eyes met hers, conveying silent urgency as they heard car doors slam outside. Time for a bedtime story, Bella called cheerfully to the twins, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. She ushered them toward the back door while Ms. Wilkins quickly packed their few belongings. They slipped out just as the front door burst open. Gunfire erupted behind them as they ran through the darkness, Nicholas shielding the twins with his body. They made it to his backup vehicle, an unmarked van parked 2 blocks away. Once safely on the road, Nicholas's phone rang. The number was blocked, but he knew who it was. Holloway, he answered, putting the call on speaker. Nicholas, my boy. Holloway's voice dripped with false warmth. Still playing the hero? I taught you better than that. You taught me to be like you, a monster who profits from others' suffering. Holloway laughed, the sound chilling. I taught you to be a survivor, but you were always weak, always looking for family, for connection. His voice hardened. That's why it was so easy to turn you against Bella. One hint of betrayal and you crumbled, just like I knew you would. In the rearview mirror, Nicholas saw Leah and Laney huddled together, their small faces filled with fear. They'd already lost one family to this man's cruelty. "We're going public with everything," Nicholas said. "The trafficking, the money laundering, Sarah Martinez's murder." "Go ahead," Holloway sneered. "By the time anyone investigates, there won't be any evidence or witnesses." After the call ended, they drove in silence until reaching a small motel on the outskirts of town. As Bella tucked the twins into bed, Nicholas overheard their whispered conversation. "Are we ever going to have a real home?" Leah asked, her voice small. "I'm scared," Lonnie added. "What if the bad men find us again?" Nicholas's chest tightened. These children had suffered enough. Looking at their frightened faces, he made his decision. "I know how to end this," he told Bella once the twins were asleep. "But you're not going to like it." "Nicholas, no," Bella said, reading his expression. "Whatever you're planning, I'm going to give Holloway what he wants, me." Nicholas's voice was firm. "He's always seen me as his protege. His weakness is his pride, his need to prove he was right about me being weak." "It's too dangerous," Bella protested, "and I'll contact him, tell him I want to make a deal. That I was wrong to turn against him." Nicholas's eyes were determined. "When he meets me, thinking he's won, that's when we'll have him." Bella gripped his arm. "You can't risk your life like this." "I already risked yours once by not believing in you," Nicholas said softly. "I won't make that mistake again." Nicholas stood in the dim light of the abandoned luxury hotel lobby, his footsteps echoing against the marble floors. The once grand chandeliers hung like dusty skeletons above him, their crystals dulled by years of neglect. His mind wandered back to just hours before. "Please don't go," Leah had begged, her small hands clutching his sleeve. Lanny stood beside her, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. "I have to end this," Nicholas had told them, gently pulling free. "Sometimes grown-ups have to do scary things to protect the people they love." Bella had grabbed his arm before he left. "This isn't just about revenge anymore, is it?" she'd asked, searching his eyes. "No," he'd answered softly. "It's about giving them a real home, a real family." Now, as Nicholas approached the designated meeting spot on the hotel's mezzanine level, his hand brushed against the gun hidden beneath his jacket. The false evidence was tucked safely in his breast pocket. Documents that would make Holloway believe his empire was about to crumble. The hotel's grand staircase creaked under his feet. Everything was silent except for the whisper of wind through broken windows. Too silent. Nicholas reached the top of the stairs, scanning the shadows. A figure emerged from behind a fallen column, but it wasn't Holloway's tall frame. Instead, Garrett Vaughn stepped into the weak moonlight, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Surprised to see me, Calloway?" Vaughn's voice echoed through the empty space. "Holloway sends his regards." Nicholas's stomach dropped. He'd been played. Holloway had known all along. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a trap. "You really thought he'd come himself?" Vaughn laughed, the sound harsh and hollow. "For someone so smart, you can be incredibly stupid." Nicholas kept his expression neutral, though his mind raced. If Vaughn was here instead of Holloway, it meant the plan had failed before it even began. Worse, it meant Holloway was several steps ahead of them. "Where's your boss hiding?" Nicholas asked, buying time as he assessed his options. "Too afraid to face me himself?" "Mr. Holloway doesn't waste time with traitors," Vaughn sneered, pulling out his gun. "He prefers to let me handle the dirty work." Behind Vaughn, shadows moved. More of his men were emerging from their hiding places, surrounding Nicholas. The trap was closing, just not the one Nicholas had planned. Vaughn's laughter echoed through the empty ballroom, bouncing off the cracked mirrors and faded wallpaper. "You really thought Holloway would meet you here? He's already gone, probably halfway to his private island by now with all his money safely hidden away." Nicholas's jaw tightened. He should have known better than to underestimate Holloway's cunning. "The old man always said you were too trusting," Vaughn sneered, circling Nicholas like a predator. "Too soft, too worried about doing the right thing. Without warning, Vaughn lunged forward, throwing a punch that Nicholas barely dodged. The fight erupted in a fury of fists and desperate moves. Nicholas blocked a kick, but caught an elbow to his ribs that sent him stumbling backward into an old serving cart. The metal crashed against the floor, the sound thundering through the empty space. Nicholas rolled away just as Vaughn's boot came down where his head had been seconds before. Blood trickled from Nicholas's split lip as he struggled to his feet. His chest heaved with each breath, his expensive suit now torn and dirty. Vaughn was younger, faster, and showed no signs of tiring. "I'm going to enjoy this," Vaughn growled, landing a solid punch to Nicholas's stomach. Nicholas doubled over, gasping for air. His vision blurred as Vaughn grabbed him by the throat and slammed him against the wall. The grip tightened, cutting off his air supply. From somewhere in the shadows, small gasps echoed. Nicholas's heart stopped. He knew those sounds. Leah and Lanny were here, watching everything. How had they followed him? No. He tried to speak, but Vaughn's grip was too tight. "Say goodbye, Calloway," Vaughn whispered, pulling back his fist for what would surely be a killing blow. A gunshot cracked through the air like thunder. Vaughn jerked back, releasing Nicholas, who crumpled to the floor, coughing and gasping. "Step away from him." Bella's voice was steel, her gun trained steadily on Vaughn. She emerged from behind a column, her eyes blazing with protective fury. "Bella, the twins!" Nicholas wheezed, trying to warn her. "We know," she said, never taking her eyes off Vaughn. "They're hiding behind me." Vaughn raised his hand slowly, that arrogant smirk still playing on his lips. "Well, isn't this touching? The whole family together one last time." Suddenly, the ballroom doors burst open. FBI agents flooded in, guns drawn, shouting commands. Vaughn's eyes darted around, calculating. With surprising speed, he turned and sprinted toward a service entrance. "Stop him!" an agent yelled. But before anyone could move, 3 sharp cracks split the air. Vaughn's body jerked violently, red blooming across his back. He fell forward, dead before he hit the ground. In the doorway where Vaughn had tried to escape, 3 men in black tactical gear lowered their weapons. Holloway's cleanup crew, doing what they did best, eliminating loose ends. The FBI opened fire, but Holloway's men had already vanished into the shadows of the old hotel. Nicholas slumped against the wall, his body aching. Bella rushed to his side, the twins following close behind her. Leah and Lonnie threw their arms around him, crying. "We were so scared," Leah sobbed into his shirt. "We couldn't let you go alone," Lonnie whispered. Nicholas wrapped his arms around them, looking up at Bella with pain-filled eyes. They'd won this battle, but Holloway was still out there. The real fight wasn't over. FBI agents secured the scene around them, calling for medical support, but Nicholas barely heard them. His mind was already racing, trying to figure out Holloway's next move. The old man was too smart to leave loose ends, and right now Nicholas and his makeshift family were the biggest loose ends of all. Nicholas sat in the dimly lit motel room, his bruised body aching from the fight with Vaughn. Bella cleaned his wounds while Leah and Laney slept curled up together on the worn-out couch, their small faces finally peaceful after hours of crying. The burner phone in Nicholas's pocket buzzed. His jaw tightened as he answered it. "I must admit you surprised me today." Holloway's smooth voice came through. "I didn't think you had it in you." "Where are you?" Nicholas's voice was cold, controlled. Holloway chuckled. "Come now, Nicholas, you know better than that. I'm somewhere you'll never find me. Take the girls and run. Live your life. You've lost." "No," Nicholas said firmly. "I'm done running, and so are you." "Always the idealist," Holloway sneered. "That's why you'll never win. Goodbye, Nicholas." The line went dead. Nicholas stared at the phone, his mind racing. Bella finished bandaging his cut and sat beside him, her eyes questioning. "He thinks he's won," Nicholas said quietly, careful not to wake the twins. "But he's made one crucial mistake." "What's that?" Bella asked. "He underestimates us, both of us." Nicholas turned to face her, his eyes intense. "I've been trying to fight this battle alone, but that's exactly what he expects. He knows how I think, how I operate." Bella's eyes widened with understanding. But he doesn't know me. No, Nicholas agreed. He doesn't. And he certainly doesn't expect us to work together. He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. I have a plan, but I need your help. Will you trust me? Bella looked at their joined hands, then at the sleeping twins. Her voice was barely a whisper when she answered, Yes. We're going to set a trap, Nicholas explained. But this time we're not just going to catch him, we're going to make him come to us. How? By giving him exactly what he wants, Nicholas said. Me, alone, and vulnerable. Except this time, you'll be my ace in the hole. Bella's eyes flickered with determination. Tell me what you need me to do. Nicholas leaned closer, his voice dropping even lower. First, we need to make him believe he's truly won. That means we have to disappear, but not in the way he expects. The twins stirred in their sleep, and both adults paused, watching them with protective eyes. When they settled again, Bella turned back to Nicholas. I won't let you face him alone, she said firmly. Not this time. I know, Nicholas replied, a small smile tugging at his lips. That's exactly why this will work. Holloway thinks he knows every move I'll make. But he doesn't know about us, about how we've changed. Bella studied his face, seeing not the cold businessman who had once pushed her away, but a man who had learned to trust again, to love again. She nodded slowly. Together then, she said. Together, Nicholas agreed, his eyes soft as he looked at her. We end this. For them. He gestured to the sleeping twins. For the first time since this nightmare began, hope flickered in both their hearts. They weren't running anymore. They were fighting back. Nicholas stood in his study, carefully preparing the falsified financial documents. Each detail had been meticulously crafted to convince Holloway that his empire was crumbling. Bella paced behind him, her fingers twisting nervously. This is too dangerous, she said, her voice tight with worry. Holloway isn't stupid. He'll know it's a trap. No, Nicholas replied, his eyes fixed on the computer screen. His greed will blind him. That's always been his weakness. He turned to face her. He'd rather risk everything than lose his money. The documents showed a complex web of transactions, suggesting that Nicholas had somehow gained control of Holloway's hidden offshore accounts. It was a masterful deception, one that would appeal to Holloway's greatest fear, losing his wealth. Within hours of leaking the information, Holloway's response came through a secure channel. A meeting was set at the International Commerce Bank in Geneva. Private, discreet, and perfect for Holloway's purposes. He took the bait, Nicholas said, showing Bella the message. What they didn't notice were two small figures hiding behind the study door. Leah and Lonnie had heard everything, their young faces creased with worry. That night, while Nicholas prepared for the confrontation ahead, the twins slipped a handwritten note under his bedroom door. Nicholas found it the next morning. His hands trembled as he read their childish scrawl. Please don't disappear like Mommy did. The words hit him like a physical blow, reminding him of what was really at stake. The meeting was set for midnight. Nicholas entered the bank's private conference room alone, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. Holloway sat at the far end of a long table, looking relaxed and confident. Nicholas, Holloway smiled, spreading his hands wide. I must admit you've impressed me. Though I wonder, did you really think I'd come alone? As if on cue, shadows moved in the corners of the room. 6 men stepped forward, their weapons trained on Nicholas. These weren't ordinary thugs. They were professional killers, their movements precise and controlled. You see, Holloway continued, this was never going to be a negotiation. He stood up slowly, straightening his expensive suit. This is goodbye. Nicholas remained perfectly still, his face betraying nothing. You're right about one thing, James, he said quietly. This isn't a negotiation. The assassins moved closer, their weapons steady. Holloway's smile widened, believing he had won. But Nicholas didn't look afraid. In fact, there was something in his eyes that made Holloway's smile falter slightly, a quiet confidence that seemed completely out of place. "What are you smiling about?" Holloway demanded, his composure cracking just slightly. "You always did underestimate her," Nicholas replied calmly. Before Holloway could process those words, the first shot rang out. The first shot shattered the conference room's window, sending glass raining down. In the chaos that followed, Nicholas dove behind a heavy marble pillar as Holloway's assassins opened fire. "Kill him!" Holloway screamed, his composed facade crumbling. Suddenly, multiple explosions rocked the building's foundation. The lights flickered, and through the smoke, FBI tactical teams burst through every entrance. Their laser sights crisscrossed the room like angry red stars. "FBI, drop your weapons." The assassins turned their attention to the new threat, engaging in a fierce firefight with the federal agents. Bullets sprayed across the expensive furniture, tearing into paintings worth millions. But Nicholas barely noticed the destruction. His eyes were locked on Holloway, who was backing away from the chaos. Holloway reached behind a bookshelf and pulled a hidden lever. A panel in the wall slid open silently. Before anyone could stop him, he disappeared into the darkness beyond. Nicholas's heart pounded as he sprinted after Holloway, ducking under gunfire. The secret passage led to a narrow stairwell, spiraling upward. Nicholas took the stairs two at a time, his footsteps echoing off the cold concrete. The stairwell opened onto the roof, where a sleek helicopter waited on a private helipad. Rain pelted Nicholas's face as he emerged into the night air. Holloway was already halfway to the helicopter. "It's over, James," Nicholas shouted over the wind. Holloway turned, his expensive suit now soaked and disheveled. "It's never over," he snarled, charging at Nicholas with desperate fury. The two men collided in a brutal exchange of blows. Holloway fought like a cornered animal, landing a vicious punch to Nicholas's jaw. But Nicholas absorbed the hit and countered with a devastating combination that sent Holloway staggering backward. Years of rage and betrayal fueled Nicholas's attacks. Every punch carried the weight of Bella's pain, every strike powered by the tears of Leah and Laney. Holloway tried to defend himself, but Nicholas was relentless. With a final, powerful blow, Nicholas sent Holloway crashing to the ground. The older man lay there, bleeding and beaten, looking up at his former protege with hatred and fear. Nicholas stood over him, his chest heaving. "This is for Bella," he said, his voice cold and final as he delivered the knockout punch that rendered Holloway unconscious. Rain poured down on the rooftop as Holloway lay bleeding at Nicholas's feet. Despite his defeated state, a cruel smile played across his face, his teeth stained red with blood. "Go ahead, kill me," Holloway taunted, his voice barely a whisper above the howling wind. "You'll always be the monster I made you." Nicholas's hand trembled as he stood over his former mentor. Years of manipulation, betrayal, and pain crashed through his mind. How many lives had Holloway destroyed? How many families had he torn apart? The weight of the moment pressed down on Nicholas like a physical force. "You taught me that power was everything," Nicholas said, his voice rough with emotion. "That trust was weakness. That love was a liability." Holloway laughed, a wet, choking sound. "And I was right, wasn't I? Look how far you've come." The door to the rooftop burst open. Bella emerged, her hair whipping in the wind, holding Holloway's own gun that she'd found during the chaos downstairs. Her eyes met Nicholas's, and in them, he saw not judgment but understanding. "If you do this," Bella said softly, "you'll never be free. He'll always have power over you." Nicholas looked at his hands, remembering the little note Leah and Lonnie had left him. "Please don't disappear like Mommy did." What example would he be setting if he chose revenge over justice? Slowly, Nicholas lowered his fist and stepped back. FBI agents rushed forward to secure Holloway, their boots splashing in the puddles forming on the rooftop. But Holloway wasn't finished. As the agents approached, his hand moved with surprising speed, revealing a hidden knife from his sleeve. He lunged at Nicholas, blade glinting in the rain. The gunshot cracked through the air like thunder. Bella's aim was true, striking Holloway in the shoulder. The force of the impact sent him stumbling backward, his eyes wide with shock. He teetered at the edge of the rooftop for one eternal moment before gravity claimed him, and he plummeted into the darkness below. The rooftop fell silent except for the steady drumming of rain. Nicholas and Bella stood frozen, watching the space where Holloway had been, as FBI agents rushed to the edge to confirm what they already knew. Their nightmare was finally over. The autumn sunlight streamed through the mansion's windows, casting warm shadows across Nicholas's study. His arm was still in a sling, a reminder of the battle on the rooftop, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional weight of the question hanging in the air. Leah and Laney stood before his desk, holding hands tightly. Their small faces were filled with uncertainty, fear swimming in their eyes. "What happens to us now?" Leah asked, her voice trembling. Lonnie squeezed her sister's hand tighter, waiting in silence. Nicholas felt his carefully constructed walls crumbling. These two little girls had done what no one else could. They had found their way into his heart, past all his defenses. He looked at their matching worried expressions, remembering how they had appeared at his gate that snowy night, how they had changed everything. His voice cracked, and for the first time in years, Nicholas Calloway let his tears fall freely. "If you'll have me, I'd love for you to stay." Bella, who had been standing quietly by the doorway, pressed a hand to her mouth, her own eyes filling with tears. She watched as the twins' faces transformed from fear to pure joy. "Really?" Lonnie whispered, speaking up for the first time that morning. "Really?" Nicholas confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. "I want us to be a family. A real family." The twins rushed forward, throwing their arms around him. Nicholas winced at the pressure on his injured arm, but held them close with his good one, breathing in the scent of their strawberry shampoo. Ms. Wilkins appeared in the doorway beside Bella, carrying a tray of hot chocolate. Her eyes were misty as she watched the scene unfold. "I'll need to prepare proper rooms for the young ladies," she said, her voice wavering with happiness. "No more temporary arrangements." Nicholas looked up at Bella over the girls' heads, the woman he had once wrongly accused, who had protected these children with her life, who had helped him find his humanity again. She was crying openly now, but her smile was radiant. "I've already started the adoption paperwork," Nicholas said softly, still holding the girls. "It should be final in a few weeks." Leah pulled back slightly, her small hand touching Nicholas's cheek where his tears had fallen. "Does this mean we can call you Daddy?" Nicholas's heart swelled so much he thought it might burst. This man who had once valued power over love, who had built walls to keep everyone out, found himself completely undone by a simple question from a little girl. "Yes," he managed to say, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes, you can." Lonnie buried her face in his shoulder and he could feel her tears soaking through his shirt. "We've never had a daddy before," she whispered. Ms. Wilkins set down the hot chocolate tray and dabbed at her eyes with her apron. "Well, now you have a whole family," she said warmly. "A father, an Aunt Bella, and even a grandmother, if you'll have me." The twins beamed at her through their tears, nodding enthusiastically. Nicholas looked around at these people who had become his family, Ms. Wilkins, who had never given up on his humanity, Bella, who had forgiven him despite everything, and these two precious girls who had taught him how to love again. Spring had transformed Nicholas Calloway's mansion, where silence once echoed through empty halls. Children's laughter now bounced off the walls. The formal living room, once a showcase of untouched furniture, now held scattered toys and half-finished puzzles. Ms. Wilkins hummed as she baked cookies in the kitchen, smiling at the sound of little feet racing down the hallway. The twins had brought life to every corner of the house, their energy infectious, their love transforming the cold space into a true home. "No running inside," Bella called out, though her stern voice was betrayed by the warmth in her eyes. She sat in the library, sorting through children's books, while keeping an ear out for the girls' adventures. Nicholas watched from his study doorway as Leah chased Lonnie past him, both giggling in their matching sundresses. His heart swelled at the sight. These moments still felt surreal, like a dream he might wake up from. Bella caught his eye from across the hall and they shared a quiet smile. Their relationship was different now, slower, more careful. Both carried scars from their past, but they were healing together. Sometimes their hands would brush while helping the girls with homework, or their eyes would meet over morning coffee, and Nicholas would feel that familiar flutter in his chest. But they took their time, building trust brick by brick. "Daddy!" Lonnie called out, breaking his reverie. "Can we go outside? Please?" Nicholas checked his watch. He had a business call in 20 minutes, but looking at their hopeful faces, he knew it could wait. "Let's all go," he said. Ms. Wilkins appeared with a plate of fresh cookies. Perfect timing for an afternoon snack in the garden. The front door, the same door that had once been firmly shut against two shivering little girls, stood wide open now, letting in the warm spring breeze. Sunlight poured through, creating a golden pathway to the outside world. Nicholas watched as Bella helped the girls put on their sun hats. His heart felt full, watching these three people who had changed his life so completely. Even now, months later, he sometimes caught himself marveling at how different things were, how different he was. Leah paused at the doorway, her small hand finding Nicholas's. Her face turned serious, the way it sometimes did when she was thinking deep thoughts. "Are we safe now?" she asked, her voice small but clear. Nicholas knelt down before them, drawing both twins into his arms. He felt Bella's gentle hand on his shoulder, heard Ms. Wilkins's soft footsteps behind them. The sun warmed their faces as he held his daughters close. "We're home," he said simply, and in those two words was everything they needed to know. If you enjoyed the story of Nicholas, Bella, Leah, and Lonnie, I hand-picked this next story that you will enjoy. Enjoyed the story of Nicholas, Bella, Leah, and Lonnie, I hand-picked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.